Good Shabbos, everyone. We will start today's prayers on page 101 with Ma Tovu. Ma Tovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenatecha Yisrael. Ma Tovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenatecha Yisrael. We turn to page 103, and we rise as we're able for the morning blessings. Berchot HaShachar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan l'sechvi v'bina, l'vavchin ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokach haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten laya'ev koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, utenenu hayom v'chol yom lechenu l'chesed l'rachamim b'einecha uve'enei v'chol ro'enu v'tagmelenu chesedim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chesedim tovim l'amo Yisrael. Mourner's Cottage is on page 121. Amen. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mavorach Lelem Lelmei Maya. היטיב ברצונך את ציון, תבנה חומות ירושלים, תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי בך לבד בטחנו, מלך אל רם ונישא, אדון עולמים. ויהי בנשוא אהרון, ויאמר משה, קום אדוני, ויפוצו אויביך, וינוסו משנאיך מפניך. כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, לעמו ישראל בקדושתו. ברך שמי דמרי עלמא. בענר החץ ולשמי קדישה, קדישה יקירה, אנא אמר תושבחן. בענר החץ, בענר החץ ולשמי קדישה, קדישה יקירה, אנא אמר תושבחן. יהי ראווה כאדמך, תפתח ליבי באורייתא, ותשלים משאלין דליבי, וליבה דכל עמך ישראל, לטוב ולחיין ולשלום, אמן. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo. Gadlu Ladonai iti uneromema Shemo Yachdav. Lecha Adonai Hagedula V'Hagevura V'Hatiferet V'Hanetzach V'Hahod Gichol Shamayim Uvaret. Huh? Dina said we're doing it from here, so I don't know. Yeshikach, thank you. Acha v'hamit na'aseh.
You're going to need to find your place. It's only
Romimu Adonai Eloheinu V'hishtachavu Argna Ksho Ki Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Please be seated, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to this new revised configuration of our sanctuary. I understand that our nice comfy chairs are on a boat somewhere enjoying the Pacific Ocean, so they are on their way. I wanted to just take a moment to talk about the beginning of this week's Torah portion. So if everybody could open up their Chumash to page 880. We are in Parshat Hukat, and Hukat is named, as all of our Torah portions are, for the first word in the reading that is new and different and unusual, right? You'll notice that the word Hukat is about the 8th word in the verse, because all of the other words are words that come across all the time. None of them would be distinctive. The word Chukah is very distinctive. It's a word for law, for rule, but it's an unusual word, and it's used specifically in this case for the ritual of the red heifer. What is the ritual of the red heifer? Basically, the idea is that to go into the temple, everyone needs to be at a high level of purity. You're going to come into contact with the holy, and we want you to be prepared for that contact. What would prevent it? Coming into contact with a corpse. Any contact with death is considered as something that knocks you out of the system of holiness, and therefore you need to be returned before you could go into the temple. So how was that done when you had a source of impurity as powerful as death? Death being so compelling. And this is a way in which Judaism teaches that even death can be contained. So what do? We find a cow that has absolutely only red hairs. Now, for those of us who are farmers, we know that's pretty rare. It is exceptionally rare. It's miraculously rare. And in fact, groups of people today who are hoping to one day rebuild the temple in Jerusalem are on the lookout for a pure red heifer all the time, because if you can, without a pure red heifer, we'll never be able to return to the temple system the way it was. So some of us are hoping they never find a red heifer, some of us are looking for a red heifer. By the way, if there's one white hair in a red heifer, can you take it out with a tweezer? Absolutely not. This has to be completely pure and red. So the rabbis tell a story that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was once meeting with a Roman, and the Roman philosopher said, "What is this crazy ritual that you have that requires a red heifer, and then you burn it, and then you take the ashes, and and mix them with water, and then sprinkle them? What does this have to do with anything related to holiness? What's going on here?" And not only that, the Roman noticed, he also said, there's something else about your ritual that doesn't really work so well. It renders somebody who is impure pure at the other end of it, but everyone who is involved in making the water with the ashes becomes impure. So it's a ritual on top of all of the other strange things about it that renders the impure pure and the pure impure. What's going on here? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to the Roman, he said, you know something? This is nothing different than what you guys do with your God of healing, where you sprinkle ashes and you make potions, and really we're basically doing the same thing you're doing. And the Roman said, oh, okay, that makes sense, and he walked away. Yochanan's students then went over to him and said, Rabbi, you just sent him away with nonsense. That doesn't really answer the question. How does this work? This doesn't seem logical. And Yochanan ben Zakkai said to the students, the ashes do not render pure, and a corpse does not render impure. This is all simply a ruling of God's as to a ritual we need to go through for re-entering the temple. It's just about the ritual. Do not seek logic here. And at that point, the students said, okay, but what about the whole tradition of saying that everything in Judaism should have a moral point? Everything should have some ethical teaching. What do you mean this all is just a rule and it doesn't actually teach anything in its specifics? And Yochanan ben Zakkai said, no, that's what you have to learn. Sometimes the point of ritual is the ritual itself. And the rabbis then wrote an entire book just about the red heifer. It's called Tractate Para, about the cow. And the question is, why? Why does this rule have such a hold on our imagination? So I want to share with you one last thought about the red heifer. It's the only ritual that was done when the temple stood outside of the temple. The red heifer was slaughtered and the ashes prepared not within the temple, but outside of the temple. And the rabbis learned from that purity and sanctity and ritual was possible even outside the temple when the temple stood. What are we doing right now? We're welcoming Shabbat and observing Shabbat here in Canton, outside of the precincts of the holy site in Jerusalem. And they found in the story of the red heifer the original statement that that is in fact possible, that God can be worshiped everywhere and that it's possible to do ritual everywhere. So there's a lot that we learn from this set of rules. On page 880, you might want to take a look at some of the notes here which expound upon this ritual, the strangeness of it, the concept of purity and impurity that's implicit here, as well as the idea that holiness is possible even outside of the sanctum, even outside of the temple in Jerusalem. Our reading today picks up a little further in the Parsha with chapter 20, verse 22. which is found on page 800 and it looks like 887. We are in the story of the children of Israel traveling through the wilderness. And you will see here that what do they do when they're traveling through the wilderness? They complain. Apparently, Jews on trips often complain. I don't think we complained on our trip, which is really, really wonderful. But you'll read here about one of those stories and the way in which the people were punished. Page 887.
I'm sorry to contradict the rabbi. However, apparently in 2020, the conservative movement changed the triennial reading. And when I set up the reading chart for my Torah readers, I hadn't gotten that far along in the Ruach. So our reading today, what Sam prepared, is actually going to begin on page 890 with verse 11.
An equally fascinating piece of Torah.
Amen.
Ya'amod, Baruch ben Yehuda, HaKohen, Baruch Shenatan Li'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato, V'atem Habekim Adonai Elohechem, Chayim Kolchem Hayom.
Baruch es Adonai Baruch. Baruch Adonai Baruch Yolam Voed. Baruch Ato Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher B'Chabonu Mikol Ha'amim V'Nosan Lonu Es Torato. Baruch Ato Adonai Nosein HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayisu me'ovot vayachanu V'yeh havarim b'midbar asher al pnei Moav mimizrach hashamesh misham nasa'u v'yachanu b'nachal Zared misham nasa'u v'yachanu me'ver arnon asher b'midbar hayotze mivul hameri Ki Arnon Gevul Moav, Bein Moav uvein Ha'amorim.
Baruch Ato Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Nosan Lonu Torah Emes Chayei Olam Notah B'Sorchenu. Baruch Ato Adonai Nosein HaTorah.
Ya'amod,
Yaakov Tuvia ben Yisrael.
Yaakov Tuvia ben
Yisrael.
Yisrael Lev, Aliyah Hashanit.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach L'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torah. Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'Natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Al Ken Yamar B'Sefer Milchamot Adonai Et Vahev B'Sufa Et Hanachalim Arnon Ve'eshed Hanachalim Asher Natal Shevet Ar V'Nishan Ligvul Moav Umisham Be'era Hi HaBe'er Asher Amar Adonai LeMoshe Esef et ha'am ve'etna lahem mayim.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet V'Chayei Olam Nata B'Tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Yesh koach.
Our reading continues with verse 17.
You want to try it? It's only 3 words.
Ya'amod Meir Elazar ben David Yitzchak v'Rivka l'Aliyah HaShlishit.
Baruch hu et Adonai Borach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam.
Baruch Adonai Borach le'olam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Az yashir Yisrael et hashira hazot ale be'er enula, ali be'er enula, be'er chafarua sharim, karua nedivei ha'am b'mechokek b'mishanotam, umimidbar matana, umimatana nechaliel, uminachaliel bamot, ומבמות הגיא אשר בשדה מואב ראש הפסקה ונשקפה על פני הישימון.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
We are going to take a moment now for prayers for healing. And I will begin with some names that I have, and then we will go around the room and also encourage those who are following on Zoom to share names quietly as well. Misha Be'erach Avotenu Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov Imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yivarech v'Yirapeh et HaHolim Duba v'Ed Tzvia v'Ed Hana Etta Bat Leah v'Tzvi v'Ed Yekutiel Zelig Halevi ben Duvora v'Ed Yisrael ben Mira HaKohen v'Ed Shoshana Ruth Bat Hana v'Ed Dr. Iris Sherman v'Ed Masha Sima Bat Chaya Dina v'Ed Chaya Ita Bat Leah v'Ed Leah Bat Basha Mordechai v'Ed Nechama Esther Bat Bracha Elia v'Ed
Erechana bat Leah Yisrael Dov ben Sira Eshka, Silla bat Malka, Kashkano, Phyllis Hirschfield, Bobby Cohen, Diane Murphy, Carol Chavez, Bruno DiCarlo, Phyllis Perry, Lisa Kate, Jerry Motel.
HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem Lachzik Amalu Rapotam, may God strengthen and heal them. Yishlach Lehem Meheru Refuah Shlema Mina Shemaim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf. Our prayers are for a healing of spirit as well as a healing of body, B'toshara Holim. And may the hands of those who are caregivers be strengthened. Shabbat Hi Milizok Refuah Krova Lavo. Hashtabah Galo Vizman Karo V'nomar. Amen.
Yit Gadal, Yit Kadash Shemei Rabba. Yom Divra Kiratev Yam Lich Malchute. V'chaye Chon Uvyom Echon. Uvchaye Devol Beit Yisrael. V'agala, V'agala. Uvizman Kariv. V'yemaru Ami. V'heshmei Rabba Mevorach. Yom Yom Yomayam Yivarach, V'yishtabach, V'yipa'ar, V'yiraman, V'yitnaseh, V'yithadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalel, Shmei Dekudesha, L'elam Mikol Birchata V'shihirata, Tushbecha Ata V'nechemata, Damiram V'yoma, V'yimaru, Amen. Yamod Hamagbiya Ta'amod Hagolelet.
Let's stand together as the Sefer Torah is lifted and taught.
Zod HaTorah Asher Samoshe B'nei B'nei Yisrael Al Pi Adonai V'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Tziva lanu Moshe.
Please be seated, everyone. The Haftorah for Parshat Chukat is found on page 910. It's from the book of Judges, and I just want to share with you something about the book of Judges. Our leaders during the period of the Judges were often very flawed individuals. The period of the Judges is considered a betwixt and between time between Moses' leadership and what would eventually be the leadership of the kings. It was a chaotic period where the leaders of the people were basically strongmen, were basically soldiers who were able to defend the people of Israel against enemy nations that were attacking them in different configurations of tribal loyalties. Take a look at the opening line on page 910. Here is the hero for this next moment in history of Israel. Yiftach is introduced. Yiftach was an able warrior. I would say that's a little bit damning by faint praise. He wasn't an excellent warrior. He wasn't a faithful follower of God. He was an able warrior. And he also was the son of a prostitute. Now, again, we don't blame children for their parentage, but I think in the context of the Bible, they're giving us a little bit of a warning here that this man might be less than the ideal leader. So he goes out and he actually does save the day. There was a period of battle, he succeeds, but on page 913, just before the battle, he makes a vow. God, if you deliver the Ammonites into my hands, then whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me on my safe return shall be the Lord's and shall be offered by me as a burnt offering. So what is he imagining? He lives in a house with a lot of cows and chickens, and he expects that a cow or a chicken is going to come out and he will make an offering. What we know, but is not actually stated in this week's Haftorah, is who is going to come out of his house to greet him. It is going to be his daughter. And therefore, there's a conundrum. His daughter comes out of the house to meet him, and he said, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me, I will sacrifice to God. He never intended this to be his daughter. We don't sacrifice children. There were many ways he might have gotten out of this, but in his arrogance and in who Yiftach was, Yiftach does sacrifice his daughter. His daughter was a virgin, and she asks only for a period of time to go out with her girlfriends and mourn her loss, mourn her death. And she does that, and we are told that mourning for Yiftach's daughter was in fact a ritual in ancient Israel, that this was something that was observed. It was a custom of our foremothers. But none of that is in our Haftorah reading today. Our Haftorah reading today ends on an upbeat note of the victory, but those of us who know the story know that from that earlier verse, a tragedy is also on the way. So Ellie is going to begin with the preliminary blessings and then an excerpt from today's Haftorah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratzah b'divreihem hane'marim b'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Vayiftach hagilad haya gibor chayil v'hu ben isha zona vayoled Gilad et Yiftach v'teled eshet Gilad lo banim vayigdalu b'nei ha'isha vayigorashu et Yiftach vayomru lo tinchal b'veit avinu ki v'nisha acheret atah vayifrach Yiftach mipnei echav vayeshev be'eretz tov vayitlaktu el Yiftach anashim reikim vayetzeu imo vayihi miyamim vayilachamu b'nei Ammon im Yisrael vayihi ka'asher nilchamu b'nei Ammon im Yisrael vayilchu ziknei Gilad lakachat et Yiftach meretz tov vayomru liyiftach lecha v'hayita lanu mekatzin v'nilachamu b'vnei Ammon vayomer Yiftach l'ziknei Gilad halo atem shnetim oti vatgorshanu mi beit avi umadua Batem Eli ata ka'asher tsar lachem vayamru ziknei Gilad el Yiftach lochein ata shavnu elecha v'halachta imanu v'nilchamta b'vnei Ammon v'hayita lanu l'rosh l'chol yoshvei Gilad Vayomer Yiftach el ziknei Gilad im yeshivim atem oti lihilachem b'vnei Ammon v'natan Adonai otam lifanai anochi ehyeh lachem l'rosh vayomru ziknei Gilad el Yiftach Adonai Yeh shomea benotenu im lo kidvorcha kein naaseh vayelech Yiftach im ziknei Gilad vayosimu ha'am oto alehem lerosh ulekatzin vaydaber Yiftach et kol devarav lifnei Adonai b'mitzpah vayishlach Yiftach malachim El Melech b'nei Ammon lemor Mali v'alach kivata elai v'hilachem b'artzi Vayomer Melech b'nei Ammon El Melech Yiftach ki lakach Yisrael et artzi v'aloto mimitzrayim me'arnon v'yad hayabok v'yad hayarden v'yata Ashiva et hen b'shalom vayosef od Yiftach vayishlach malachim el Melech b'nei Ammon Vayomer lo ho Amar Yiftach lo lakach Yisrael et Eretz Moav v'et Eretz Bnei Ammon. Ki bialotam mimitzrayim vayeled Yisrael bamidbar ad yom suv vayavo kadesha vayishlach Yisrael malachim el melech Edom lemor Ebrona biartzecha v'lo shama melech Edom v'gam el melech Moav Shalach v'lo ava vayeshev Yisrael b'kadesh vayelech bamidbar v'yasav et Eretz Edom v'et Eretz Moav vayavo mimizrach shemesh v'eretz Moav vayachanun v'ever Arnon v'lo ba'u b'gvul Moav Ki Arnon gvul Moav. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam tzor kol ha'olamim tzadik b'kol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh hamdaber umkayim shekol devarav emet v'tzedek ne'eman atah hu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim devarecha v'devarecha midvarecha achor lo yoshev reikam Ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman atah Baruch atah Adonai ha'el ha'ne'eman b'kol devarav Rachem al Tzion ki hivet chayenu v'la'aluvat nefesh toshia b'mheira b'yameinu Baruch atah Adonai Misamer Tzion b'vaneha Samchenu Adonai Eloheinu B'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha uv'malchut Beit David Mashichecha b'mheira yavo v'yogel libenu al kisolo yeshev zor v'lo yinchalu ot acherim et kavodo ki v'shem katshecha nishbat halo shelo yichben nerot leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Magen David Al HaTorah v'al ha'avodah v'al hanviim v'al yom haShabbat hazeh shenatat lanu Adonai Eloheinu l'kedusha v'limnucha l'chavod u'tiferet al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mvorchim otach yitbarach shemcha b'fi kol chai tamid li'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Thank you. A very important lesson about Yiftach for just the concept that our leaders can be flawed, and that often those who seem to be rising to the occasion might not be the perfect individuals in all regards. So do hold that in mind as you read biblical stories, that our stories are not always about the fact that our leaders were always people who were of moral perfection. We're going to take a moment now for some prayers, first for our nation and then for the state of Israel. As we do say the prayer for our nation today, we do hold in our thoughts those who are mourning in Highland Park and that community, as well as those who are healing and who are tending to the injured in that terrible set of shootings that took place last weekend. The prayer for our country, Janet, page 177. We'll read these 3 paragraphs responsively.
Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessings upon this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, its judges, officers, and officials, who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public.
Help them understand the rules of justice you have decreed, so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. Adonai, whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and freedom among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So as some of you are aware, a week ago, the government of Israel fell once again. It's a parliamentary democracy. These things happen, but this will be now yet another election, way too many elections in close proximity. I wanted to just say a word about the outgoing government. The outgoing government led by Naftali Bennett was unique in Israel's history in two ways in particular that I want to highlight right now. Number one, Naftali Bennett was the first prime minister of Israel who was an observant Jew, the first prime minister of Israel who wore a kippah. And it really was a powerful healing that somebody from the traditionalist but open-minded camp was the prime minister of Israel. Second of all, this was the first government that was a broad ideological coalition, and a coalition that included some of the Arab parties. And that was a major breakthrough for Israel, for the sense that parties to the right could sit with non-Zionist parties from the Arab sector and still form a government. And it was the first government in years that was able to pass a budget. Israel had been functioning without a passed budget for years. That's the most basic thing a government does, and the Bennett government was able to do that. The downside of the Bennett government was that as a broad ideological coalition, they said, we're not going to touch anything controversial during our tenure. We will focus on what unites us and not what divides us, which means that for the year of Bennett's government, there was really no motion and no conversations with the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. Just in the last few days, the new prime minister, the acting prime minister of Israel, Yair Lapid, who has now taken over as the caretaker prime minister, had a phone conversation with the head of the Palestinian Authority, the first communications that the prime minister and the head of the PA had had in a number of years. Yair Lapid is a fascinating gentleman. He comes from the world of sports as well as the world of television. He was a host, had a very popular television program. He's charismatic. He's an exceptionally good speaker. And I want to share with you just an excerpt from his inaugural speech as prime minister. I want to recommend this speech in its fullness to you, because if you just change the words Israel to United States, it carries a very, very powerful message. And I want to share a little bit of that with you. This is from the new Prime Minister Yair Lapid's opening address. The great Israeli question is actually why, in a period in which we have wide national agreement on all the important topics, the levels of hate and anxiety within Israeli society are so high. Why is polarization more threatening than ever? The answer is politics. In Israel, extremism doesn't come from the streets into politics. It's the opposite. Extremism flows like lava from politics to the streets. The political sphere has become more and more extreme, violent, and vicious. and it's dragging Israeli society along with it. This we must stop. This is our challenge. And then he says the following. There are two photos hanging in my office in the Knesset, one alongside the other, David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin, two political rivals, but also the two most important prime ministers we've had. It's a little bit of the equivalent of having in your office Ronald Reagan and FDR. Two people who just were at loggerheads throughout their careers, Ben-Gurion and Begin, and Lapid says, I can honor both of them. The goal is greater than everything that divides us. Our test is not whether or not we win the argument, but rather if we learn to find a way to work together with those who don't agree with us. Wow. In any case, it's a much longer statement. It is a beautiful statement about the importance of working together and finding those places of commonality and not letting politics poison the street. So with that, the election will be after the holidays. We'll take a moment now to stand together for Hatikvah, page 448, if you'd like to follow in the Siddur.
Kol od b'valeva nima nefesh Yehudi Sophia ulfasei Mizrach kadima ayin l'tzion Sophia. Kol oravta tikotenu hatikva shnot hapayim li'olam loshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Li'olam loshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.
Thank you, Adrian. Let's remain standing. The ark is opened. Page 183, the Sefer Torah is lifted as well.
Yehalalu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren liamo, tihila lechol chasidav, levnei Yisrael am kerovo, hallelujah, hallelujah. Mizmor leDavid, vayechesof yarot uvehechalo, kulo amer kavod, Adonai lamabul yashav. Shev l'Adonai melech leolam, Adonai os li'amo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom uvnucho yomar. Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al ta'azovu, etz chayim hi, lama chazikim ba, v'tomcheha meushar, deracheha, darchei noam, v'chol netivoteha, Shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva Chadesh Chadesh Yamin. You can close the wooden doors. Chadesh Yamenu Dem. Thank you.
Please be seated, everyone. Thank you, Sam. So it took us a while, but after a little more than 2 years of planning and scheduling and rescheduling, we did manage to have a trip to Israel this May. Our trip took place just in the transitional moment between Israel reopening after severe COVID restrictions, and by the time we got home, you no longer needed to, by the time some of us got home, you no longer needed to get a PCR test to get into Israel or back into the United States. Though for our trip, we were blessed with being protected. And as you might share the story, you guys got an extra 18 hours in America out of that PCR test. So we thought it would be nice to, on this Shabbat, hear from the participants in the trip and hear a little bit about what the experience was like. There were some of us on the trip, it was a first trip to Israel. For some of us on the trip, it was one of many trips to Israel. Some of us have family and friends we visited. Some, the connection to Israel was the connection to the land itself and to the people more broadly. So we have some people online from the trip, as well as 5 of us here in the sanctuary. So Vivian, I think we will start with you online. Asking people to share some of their experiences from the trip, and we wanted to start with you, our friend all the way down under in Australia. Viv, wonderful to see you again. And if you would, take us a bit into your experience.
a lot of time with, we spent a lot of time with one another, just really learning and feeling good about being there and about being part of the group. So thanks to all of you for making that my trip too.
Thank you, Ann. I want to just mention one sentence Ann alluded to, the talk we got at the Syrian border. It was stunning. Our guide told us the number of armies that are fighting in Syria. And I can't remember now, it was like 40 something, like there were 40 identifiable groups fighting each other for control of Syria. And, you know, it's mind-boggling what is being kept together there. Kathy.
So I had been to Israel several times, but the last time I had been there was something like 38 years ago. So it was a completely new country and a completely new experience. I think what made this trip so great was a couple of things. One, we were a small group. And with a small group, you can certainly do more things and talk about more things amongst yourselves that is harder when you're in a much larger group. I think we got to maybe do a few more things because we were a small group. I really appreciated having Kayla, who was from Keshet, with us along with the rabbi, because Kayla was extremely knowledgeable and really told us a lot of things that I certainly wasn't familiar with, but then the rabbi was there to kind of fill in from the rabbinical side or the history side that was a little bit different, and the two together really made it quite an unusual and terrific experience. I'm also an optometrist, and I had a chance to visit with a few colleagues while I was there, and that was really fun because here, I'm kind of part of a smaller group of optometrists who do some specialty care, and I had a chance to meet with some of those people there, and they were just as warm and welcoming and fun as the group here. I really found that kind of welcoming really nice to have in a place that I didn't know as well. And then the other was that this trip wasn't so what I would call touristy. It was really more about getting to know about the country, getting to meet people from different factions. When we went up to the Golan and they were talking about all the different groups that are involved, both on the Israeli side and the Syrian side, the army officer held up a map and it had all these lines on it that were intersecting just to show how complicated it can be. And it kind of reminded me, in my profession, we have one of the brain where we have all these lines that go up and down and side to side and crisscross each other. And it looked very much like that it's much more complicated than the kinds of things that you hear. And I think overall what made it great was hearing about the country and getting to see the country from a perspective that was much more people-oriented, and also the fact that I think we were a great group and really stuck together and kind of helped each other along. And the only frustrating thing for me is I was really trying hard to remember more of my Hebrew, and everywhere I went, I would try to read a sign and I'd be like, oh, I don't know that word. And then I'd realize it was just transliteration of English into Hebrew. And that's why I couldn't really read it, because it was just an English word written in Hebrew. But overall, I thought it was a great trip, and I'm ready to go back again.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Hi, the trip was a dream for me. To be in the land flowing with milk and honey, it was just unreal. And like Anne, there was a small group and everybody was so friendly. And the best part of the trip was my beauty was with me, Gabo, and everybody loved Gabo. And to meet Viv, to meet new people, she was so great. And the whole thing was, it was an educational tour led by Kyla Ship, and she taught us so much and reaffirmed and things that I probably, I learned so much about the Jewish culture. In Tel Aviv, in the North Shore Kibbutz Hotel, and in Jerusalem, the Bathsheba Hotel, we stayed. We met with people. We met with an artist. We met in a kibbutz with a man that had been there for 40 years, I believe. Benny, the artist David, I got some of his pictures. We met with a Christian woman that very famous there that making coffee. We also met with an Ethiopian woman that Kyla said was going to be the more, but I thought she was very outspoken. And she went from 1985, she came to Israel, and it was a huge trip. It was like the Exodus, which we also were on. The replica of the boat was unreal. And the woman from Ethiopia, she said that when she finally made it to Israel, she said, "You mean there are Jews that are white?" And we all laughed. And a most amazing speak that we met with was this man that was, I believe, Arab-Palestinian, didn't speak English, and Kyla, her boss, they were friends, and he interpreted. And the man said that when he grew up, he had a hatred for Jews. And then he somehow made it to Israel. It was very unclear, but he said that a Hebrew woman befriended him, invited him for dinners, all right? And then in 1991, he said, he must have been like a teenager, he said that he wanted to see the woman, but it was when the Kuwait and the Wells having very much tension, they had a shutdown in Israel. And he went out, and they accused him of throwing stones and arrested him and roughed him up. And then an Israeli officer came and heard his story and said, clean this man up, get him some medical care, get him food, take care of him, okay? So he turned his life around, and he went from hate to love. And he opened up a school for Israeli, Hebrew, and Arab students, young students, to teach them that not to throw stones and to live in peace. It was an amazing story. And to swim in the beautiful Mediterranean Sea in Tel Aviv, it was just unreal. Just to float in the Dead Sea and Masada and the Western Wall and all the sections that we went through in Jerusalem, the whole trip was, I'll have to go back again when I can do it. It was just unbelievable.
Thank you.
And thank you.
You're reminding me, it was a packed 10 days. I really did meet with all of those people. So, Adrian, Jerry, please.
Hi, Vivian. Miss you, love you. And Rabbi, I can't thank you enough for your guidance. We were always learning. You were always teaching. All these small things. I mean, and you living in Tel Aviv and Israel, you pointed out these little corners or little alleyways where different things happened. It was just, the amount that I learned was just overwhelming. But I learned about the smallness of Israel and also the greatness of Israel. The smallness of Israel was when we were up in the Golan, as we spoke about, and you could see a flag in the distance, and that's Syria. And oh my God, it's so close. The enemy could be right here. And the narrowness of Israel. And in the old city, the smallness of seeing the bullet holes in the wall. And Jordan was right here. I never conceptualized how dangerous living could be in Israel. The greatness of Israel is the people, the city. Tel Aviv was just overwhelming to me. I mean, the beauty of the beach and the largeness of the city, and standing at the Shuk in Tel Aviv. I needed a few bucks. So I went over to the ATM. I didn't speak any Hebrew. Rabbi came with me, guided me through the ATM, and then standing on the corner with the buses going by and the cabs and all the tumult. And the rabbi looked at me and he said, "Look, we built all this." And to me, that was just having that concept of I'm part of this. But the overwhelming part of my Israel trip, not only being with everybody and having a great time, Vivian, you were fabulous, and learning how you deliver medical care on horseback in Australia. It's great. But I had never been to Israel before. And getting to the wall on Erev Shabbat in the heat of the day with all of the people, and the rabbi was behind me, and I walked down to the wall, touched the wall, put some slips in it and some notes in it, feeling the heat of the wall and the religious fervor behind me and all around me, and bringing my family siddur with me and my brother's Alav Shalom Kippah. It was really very powerful to me and overwhelming. And I'll never forget it. I want to go back. We'll be going back soon. Barney's son will be bar mitzvah in a couple of years. And I just loved it. And it really, I know what it is to be Jewish now.
I just want to say, you're taking us back to that Friday night. This was the first time the Egalitarian Kotel had been reopened for Friday night prayer since COVID. So we were literally the only people there, which was sort of a very interesting experience. The main Kotel Plaza had all these groups of high school kids from all over the world singing and dancing, and being next to you as you walked up to the Kotel, and were just so overwhelmed with where you were and the family connection and the messages you were putting in. It was, an image I will not forget. It was very special. And the woman who led us in davening, who did Kabbalat Shabbat that night, was the number 2 person in the conservative movement in Israel. And she came and she led us in the davening, which was very, very special. Adrian.
So since I have to bring this home here, I'm going to end on a funny. It was as moving as it was to be in Israel again, and I had not been since my bat mitzvah, which was 53 years ago. And a lot had changed, obviously. The country was very, very different. And it was just, I remember when I was there when I was 12, and how overwhelmed I was that everybody was Jewish. I remember distinctly that feeling. And that came to me again, being there. It was such a comforting feeling to be there. It was, I can't even describe that. That's mainly what I felt. The whole trip, everywhere we went. It was comfortable, it was easy, it was amazing. The nice part about this trip, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to go on the trip, was because it wasn't just follow the lollipop. It had an educational twist to it, which I enjoyed. There were fun moments, there were serious moments. The group was great, we had a blast. We got lost. We found our way because Anne has this amazing talent with this little GPS thing that she can't figure out. It was hysterical. We walked a ridiculous amount. They tell you in advance there's a lot of walking. They're lying. There's an unbelievable amount of walking. I think Donna had on a Fitbit that showed we walked almost 5 miles a day. These Pulkies haven't seen 5 miles a day in a very long time. It was very funny. We had some fun moments, too, I have to say, and I'm going to end on this one because it was a funny moment. When we were at the Dead Sea, And we went to a public area, a public beach area, where there were lockers and you could change, and there was dressing rooms and showers and so forth. And the rabbi and I and Jerry were the last one. We were together as we were walking down to the sea. I have never floated in my life. My father used to float. He would sit there for hours in the water. My husband float. I've never been able to float. I have no idea why. In Europe and in the Middle East also, I noticed women, no matter what size they are, have on these little itty-bitty bathing suits. I cannot do that. I'm wearing the American skirted bathing suit to cover the pulky. Okay, we go down, we get in the water, and I'm floating. And I'm like amazed that I can float. I'm fascinated that I could float. Then I realized I couldn't get up because you're floating and you literally cannot put your feet down. So what do I do? Of course, I yell for Jerry. Jerry, you got to come put my legs down. It was really very funny, but it was so much fun. It really was. And the rabbi, as we were leaving, said to me, having seen me in a bathing suit, I hope you won't think less of me on the bimah, Rosh Hashanah. I said, don't worry, Rabbi, having seen these pulkeys, there'll be no laughing when I'm in the front row. Honestly, though, it was great. And having you there was really wonderful. Because, yeah, your skew over and above Kayla's on everything it was wonderful. It really was. We had a blast. We really did. I'm looking forward to the next Kesha trip that we're discussing. And hopefully the same group will go. And honestly, it was worth every moment, even though Jerry and I were a little late getting there. Thank you, CVS. But we finally did. And to meet everybody, Vivian included, we had a blast. It was great. It was great. It was an all comforting, emotional tour. It really was. From the crying at the wall to the laughing hysterically. It really was. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I recommend these trips to anyone. The Kesha trips, because there's an educational skew to it, really offer a lot. They really do. And it's not, drilled into you. It's just informational, and it's interesting, and it's real. It's not just learning from a text. It's real. It's real people. It's real places. It's real conversations, which was so wonderful. We thoroughly enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you, Vivian.
Right. So I think Bob and Donna are with us online, so we will conclude with them. If you guys would like to share a couple of memories, that would be great. who is a professor of literature and poetry. She is a wonderful teacher. We walk into her home in Jaffa, and there are these gorgeous portraits of sort of like fin de siècle Central European families, these elegant women, and so we said, okay, just before you teach us the poetry, tell us about who these people are. And it's her husband's family and amazing Holocaust stories. And that was it. We got back to the poetry for the last 10 minutes. Rachel Corzine comes to our neighborhood every year. She's been teaching every year at Temple Emmanuel in Newton. She's coming back next year, and she teaches at universities as well as at synagogues. So we're going to see if we can get Rachel to come. The last thing I want to mention is that Kayla, Ship, and Keshet is doing a trip to Andalusia, to South Spain, the Jewish-Muslim encounter in South Spain in the Middle Ages this May, and we will have more information about that moving forward. So this might be a year to let the two of us do some poetry teaching and to do a trip to that amazing part of the world. So more details about that coming up. And the next Israel trip, we will see. But so everyone, thank you. Thank you so much for your reports and for your kind words. This was a wonderful trip. Thank you, guys. And we'll conclude our service now and then have, I think, some more time to sit together and talk over Kiddush. So Sam, if we can invite you back up. We're going to conclude with Ein Eloheinu, page 204, page 204.
En Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu, en Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu, mi Eloheinu, mi Chadonenu, mi Chemalkeinu, mi Chemoshienu, en Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Ladonenu, Nodel Lemalkeinu, Nodel Lemoshienu, en Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, en Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, en Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu, Atahu Shehiktiru Avo Tenu Lefanecha El Ketoret Hasamim, en Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemoshienu.
Let's stand together. Aleinu to
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'ateit gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kimishbechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vigor aleinu kechol hamonam, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטש המים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגבי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים. ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. כי המלכות שלך היא, ולעול מעד תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. During the week to come, we recall in our community the Yortsites, the anniversaries of the deaths of Samuel Simon, Viola Swart White, Howard Levy, Ida Rosengard, Sarah Ween, Edward Schoenig, Lillian Tandler, James Woolner, Rita Benton, Richard Harris, Michael Richard Koriski, Glenn Sable, Joseph Steinberg, Benjamin Brooks, Joseph Lappin, Alfred Braverman, Louis Chapman, Hyman Fishman, Isaac Ogans, Sidney Lidman, and Dave Wolford. Are there other names being recalled this morning? The mourners and those who are recalling a Yortzeit, please stand together now for the Kaddish, page 207. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Mei Rabbah, v'yoma divra hirutei v'yamliv malchutei, v'chayei chon v'yomei chon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kori v'yimru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach li'olam yomei omaya. Yitborach v'yishtabach v'yitpahar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudusha b'riyahu. Li'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran v'yalma v'yimru amen. Yehi shlomo rabbo min shmaya v'chayim oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav hu yaseh shalom oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Once again, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. The only announcement I want to make is that during coming weeks, services are going to be led by a number of voices that we will be hearing more during the year to come. Cantor Stephen Abramowitz will be leading for the high holidays, will be leading some of our services over the summer, and we will also be meeting and hearing davening for the first time. Josh Schreiber, our new rabbinic and cantorial intern for the year. So Josh will be leading a number of Friday night and Shabbat morning services during the summer, as will Lisa Feld. So we are going to have a variety of leaders during our summer services, but also introducing us to some of the voices and melodies we'll be hearing during the year ahead. I believe, Andrew, that Janice is with us online. And if our new president would like to say Shabbat Shalom, we can, Janice, unmute yourself, and we'd be delighted to hear your voice.
The barrier.
Yes, right, exactly. Sam, thank you so much for your document.
Baruch Tiyeh. Adon olam asher malach b'terem kol yetzer nivra li'et nasa v'chevtzo kol azai melech shemo nikra azai melech shemo nikra v'yacharei kichlot hakol levado yimloch nora v'hu haya v'hu hove v'hu yihye betifara v'hu yihye betifara v'hu echad v'yein sheni la'am shilo lehachbira beli reshit beli tachlit velo ha'oz v'ha'misra velo ha'oz v'ha'misra v'hu eli v'chai go'ali v'tzor chevli beit b'yetzara v'hu nisi umanosli menat kosi biomekra menat kosi biomekra biado afkid ruchi beit ishan viaira viemruchi geviati adonai li velo ira adonai li velo ira.
Let's stand together.
Al ken merach Adonai et yom haShabbat v'hikadshehu savri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Jeez. It's hard to get to the challah. COVID protections, yeah? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. My friends, there is lunch, so enjoy. Thank you. That's great. Okay.
Thank you for this. It felt very official.
Yeah.
Baruch Leah. Can you get rid of this thing?
Yeah, I'm going to hold on to it and we'll use it.
Thank you, Andrew.